The city never truly slept, but at 3 in the morning, it finally dozed, breathing in the quiet dark broken only by the distant sigh of a passing car. In a small, warm apartment that smelled perpetually of sugar and yeast, Leo was already awake. His hands, covered in a dusting of flour, moved with a gentle rhythm as he folded dough. Baking was his piece, the one thing that still made sense. The silence around him, however, was a heavy kind, the kind that made his own thoughts echo too loudly. He had been thinking about Miles again. A familiar ache, dull and stubborn, settled in his chest. His phone sat on the counter, a dark rectangle against the floury marble. Without really thinking, his floury thumb brushed the screen, pulling up his recent calls. He meant to call the pre-order line for the bakery, a number he had dialed 100 times. But his eyes were tired, and his heart was somewhere else, still stinging from the cruel words Miles had thrown at him just the day before. "You're too soft, Leo. The world eats people like you for breakfast." His finger tapped the wrong contact. The line began to ring. Leo, wiping his hands on his apron, didn't notice. He put the phone on speaker and set it down, turning to get a bowl of proofing sponge from the fridge. The call connected. There was no greeting from the other side, just a deep, waiting silence that Leo, in his small, echoey kitchen, mistook for a bad connection. "Hello? Mrs. Henderson?" Leo said, his voice soft. "It's Leo from Sunrise Bakery. I'm just confirming your large sourdough order for..." He trailed off, listening. No response. Just a faint, almost electrical stillness. He shrugged, assuming the automated system had picked up. He should hang up. But the quiet on the line felt strangely like company, and the apartment felt so very empty. He began to talk, not to the silent phone, but to the dawn creeping at his window. "Sometimes I don't know why I even try," he murmured, kneading the dough with more force than necessary. I wish someone would see me. Not just use me until there's nothing left to take." He sighed, a shaky sound that filled the kitchen. "I make all this bread to fill people's homes with warmth, and mine just feels cold." On the other end of the line, in a sleek, dark office high above the city, Kai sat perfectly still. He had been reviewing security reports when his private line, a number only 5 people in the world had, rang. He'd answered with a curt, "Speak." He heard the soft, youthful voice say, "Mrs. Henderson?" and knew it was a wrong number. His finger had been a millisecond from ending the call. Then he heard the pain in the stranger's voice. It wasn't dramatic or loud. It was a quiet, profound sadness that seeped through the speaker. Kai, a man who dealt in threats and steel, found himself frozen. He heard the rustle of fabric, the clink of a bowl. He heard a life, lonely and hurting, unfolding in real time. He heard Leo whisper, "I'm so tired of being alone," and something in Kai's own guarded heart clenched. This wasn't a client. This wasn't an enemy. This was a boy talking to the dark, unaware he had an audience. Leo, blissfully unaware, finished shaping his loaves. "Well, gotta get these in the oven," he said to the empty air, a habit born of solitude. "Maybe tomorrow will be brighter?" He reached over and finally ended the call. The line in Kai's office went dead with a soft click. Leo washed his hands, the strange moment already fading, just another oddity in a lonely morning. In his tower, Kai stared at the phone in his hand. The digital call log showed a number, a location traced instantly by his systems. A bakery in the old district. He saw the name attached to the subscriber account, Leo. The city outside his window began to lighten, shifting from black to deep blue. Kai had a day of power meetings and difficult decisions ahead. But all he could hear was the echo of a heartbroken voice saying, "I wish someone would be nice to me." He was a man of action, not of feelings. He solved problems. And he had just heard a problem that bypassed all his defenses. He didn't believe in fate. He believed in information and opportunity. And he now had very specific information. He saved the number. He didn't know why. Not yet. The oven timer dinged in Leo's kitchen, a cheerful sound. The first golden loaves were ready, filling the space with a warmth that, for a moment, almost reached the corners of his heart. He had no idea his simple mistake had sent a signal into the night, a silent SOS heard by the most unlikely of rescuers. The sun began to rise, painting the sky in hopeful colors, completely unaware that a single wrong number had just set 2 very different lives on a collision course. The day that followed the wrong number was long and gray for Leo. It was as if all the sadness he'd whispered into the phone had gathered into a cloud that followed him from the bakery back to his apartment. His shift had ended, but the final, ugly fight with Miles played on a loop in his mind. It wasn't even a fight, really. It was a demolition. Miles had shown up at the bakery, not for reconciliation, but for a final, greedy grab. He demanded money Leo didn't have, called him weak, a useless omega, and left with a sneer that felt like a physical slap. The words had scoured Leo raw, leaving him feeling hollowed out and fragile. Now, in the deep silence of his own living room, the tears he'd held back all day finally fell. They were quiet tears, the kind that just seeped out, tracing hot paths down his cheeks as he curled into the corner of his worn sofa. The apartment, usually his sanctuary, felt like a box holding all his loneliness. He hugged a cushion to his chest, wishing it could absorb the ache. He was so tired. Tired of the betrayal, tired of the emptiness, tired of hoping for a kindness that never seemed to come. Meanwhile, across the city, Kai's day had been the opposite of quiet. Meetings had bled into strategy sessions, followed by the controlled chaos of managing his territory. Yet, through it all, the memory of that early morning voice was a persistent, quiet hum in the back of his mind. He checked the file his tech team compiled on Leo Adair. 20 years old. Orphaned. Worked at Sunrise Bakery. Clean record. The photo showed a young man with kind, light brown eyes and a hesitant smile. He looked gentle. The exact opposite of everything in Kai's world. As the night deepened, a strange, unfamiliar feeling settled in Kai's chest. It was a tug, a sense of something unfinished. He was a man who controlled everything in his orbit, but he couldn't control the nagging thought. What if he's crying again? What if, right now, he's sitting in that silence? He told himself it was irrational. He told himself it was none of his business. But Kai had built his empire on listening to his instincts, and every instinct told him the boy with the sad voice was in over his head. He found Jax, his second-in-command, in the gym. Jax was punching a heavy bag, his movements fluid and powerful, a sharp contrast to his usually joking demeanor. "We're going for a drive," Kai said, his tone leaving no room for question. Jax stopped, catching his breath. "Now. Boss, it's nearly 4. He saw the look in Kai's eyes, the one that meant a decision had been made, consequences be damned. "Okay," Jax said simply, grabbing his jacket. He didn't ask questions. He trusted Kai. The black car moved through the sleeping streets like a shadow. Kai drove, his jaw set. Jax glanced at him, reading the uncharacteristic tension in his shoulders. "This about that phone call this morning?" he ventured. Kai had mentioned it only in passing, but Jax was observant. Kai just nodded, turning onto the street listed in Leo's file. He parked a few houses down from a small, tidy apartment building. The windows were dark except for one on the ground floor. Leo's. The light was on, a soft yellow glow in the vast dark. Inside, Leo had cried himself out into a numb, shaky exhaustion. He was just contemplating the monumental effort of moving to his bed when a sound cut through the fog. A knock. Not a friendly tap, but a firm, solid knock on his front door. His heart leapt into his throat. No one visited him, ever. Especially not at 4 in the morning. Fear, cold and immediate, replaced the sadness. Was it Miles? Had he come back for more? Trembling, Leo crept to the door, standing on his toes to peer through the tiny peephole. The view was distorted, but he could see 2 tall figures filling the frame. They weren't police. They were dressed in sleek, dark clothes. The one in front had sharp, serious features and eyes that seemed to look right through the wood. The one behind him was broader, with a surprisingly alert expression. They looked dangerous. They looked like trouble. Leo's breath hitched. He stayed perfectly still, hoping they'd think no one was home and go away. The knock came again, more deliberate. Then a voice, deep and calm, not loud but carrying an undeniable authority, filtered through the door. "Leo. Open the door. We're not here to hurt you." He knew his name. Panic fluttered in Leo's chest like a trapped bird. How did they know his name? What did they want? He thought about calling for help, but who would he call? The voice spoke again, softer this time. "We heard you. Last night. On the phone." The world tilted. The phone. The wrong number. The things he'd said. Oh no. A hot wave of humiliation washed over him, followed by a deeper, more terrifying confusion. Who had he been talking to? "Please," the voice said, and the single word held no threat, only a strange, compelling certainty. "Open the door." Something in that tone, in the sheer impossibility of the situation, cut through Leo's fear. These men, whoever they were, hadn't broken his door down. They were asking. And they had heard his deepest, saddest secret whispered to the dark. With shaking hands, his pulse pounding in his ears, Leo turned the lock and pulled the door open just a crack, the chain still fastened. Up close, the man in front was even more intimidating. He was all sharp angles and controlled power. But his dark eyes, when they met Leo's red-rimmed ones, didn't hold cruelty. They held a fierce, startling intensity. "My name is Kai," he said, his gaze unwavering. "This is Jax. You called my number by mistake. I heard everything." He paused, letting the words sink into the stunned silence. "We're not here to hurt you. We're here to help." Leo stared, his mind blank. The Mafia boss and his second-in-command stood on his worn welcome mat at 4 in the morning because of a wrong number. It was the craziest thing that had ever happened to him. And yet, looking into Kai's eyes, he didn't see the lies he was used to from Miles. He saw a stark, terrifying honesty. The chain on the door felt very flimsy. Slowly, moving as if in a dream, Leo reached up, slid the chain free and opened the door all the way. For a long moment, the three of them stood frozen in the doorway of Leo's small apartment, a bizarre tableau in the pale pre-dawn light. Leo, small and rumpled in his soft pajamas, his face still streaked with tears. Kai, a pillar of dark, imposing stillness. And Jax, a step behind, his usually playful expression softened into one of careful assessment. Kai broke the silence, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate in the quiet space. "May we come in?" It was a question, not a demand. Leo, his mind still whirling like a leaf in a storm, simply nodded and stepped back. He watched, a little dazed, as these two men who seemed carved from a different, harder world entered his humble, flower-dusted home. They didn't swagger or prowl. Kai's eyes swept the room once, taking in the cozy, worn sofa, the small kitchenette, the framed photos of smiling strangers, bakery customers he'd grown fond of, and then his gaze returned to Leo as if it were the only thing that mattered. "You should sit," Jax said, his voice surprisingly gentle. He gestured to the sofa. Leo obeyed, sinking into the cushions as his legs felt suddenly weak. Kai and Jax didn't sit. They remained standing, but Kai leaned back against the small dining table, making himself slightly less towering. It was a small concession, but Leo noticed. Who are you?" Leo finally managed to whisper, his voice hoarse from crying. "I told you. Kai." "And Jax," Kai said. He paused, choosing his next words with obvious care. "We run a family business. It's logistics. Security. We solve problems." Jax let out a soft snort that wasn't quite a laugh. "You could say that. Think of us as very persuasive problem solvers." He offered Leo a small, lopsided smile that was meant to be reassuring, though it didn't fully erase the sharp intelligence in his eyes. "Logistics," Leo repeated, the word feeling foreign. He looked from Kai's intense stare to Jax's attempt at a smile. These weren't accountants. The quiet authority they carried, the way they moved, the sheer presence of them, it spoke of a world of shadows and consequences. A dangerous world. The word mafia whispered at the edges of his mind, both terrifying and, strangely, making a terrible kind of sense. "The man who upset you," Kai continued, his voice dropping. "Miles. He is a problem." A fresh wave of shame heated Leo's face. They knew about Miles too. Of course they did. They'd heard him and they'd clearly looked into his life. He should have felt violated, but all he felt was a numb exhaustion. He was my boyfriend," Leo admitted, the word tasting like ash. "He wasn't always like that. Or maybe he was and I was just too blind to see it." He looked down at his hands twisting in his lap. "He wanted money I didn't have. When he realized there was nothing left to take, he just left. And he made sure I knew it was all my fault for being me." Kai's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Jax's smile vanished, replaced by a flicker of something dark and cold. "It is not your fault," Kai said, and the words were absolute, a decree. "A man who preys on kindness is the weakest kind of coward. He saw something good in you and tried to drain it until it was empty. That is his failure, not yours." The statement was so blunt, so fiercely certain, that it cut through the fog of self-blame that had clung to Leo for months. He blinked up at Kai, seeing not pity in his eyes, but a cold, clean anger on his behalf. It was a strange feeling being defended so unequivocally. "What do you want from me?" Leo asked, the question he'd been too scared to voice finally tumbling out. "Why are you really here?" "I don't have anything." Kai exchanged a brief look with Jax. It was Jax who answered, his tone turning practical. "We have a headquarters. Big, boring building full of serious people who drink terrible coffee and eat sad sandwiches from the vending machine. It's depressing." A faint, confused frown touched Leo's brow. "Okay?" Kai picked up the thread, his gaze steady on Leo. "We need a baker. For our cafeteria. Someone to make proper bread, pastries. Things that taste like..." He seemed to search for the right word, his eyes flickering around Leo's warm, fragrant kitchen. Like this place feels. Leo stared, utterly bewildered. You're offering me a job? At your logistics company? It's a real job, Kai affirmed. With real pay. You would have your own professional kitchen. Supplies. An assistant if you need one. And, he added, his voice dipping into something softer, more deliberate, you would have our protection. Miles or anyone else would not be able to touch you there. You would be under our umbrella. Our umbrella. The offer was insane. It was a lifeline thrown from a pirate ship. A job baking croissants for the mafia. Safety but of the most dangerous kind. He looked at these two alphas, their power a tangible force in his little living room. They were offering him a cage but a gilded one. A fortress. His instinct, the one Miles had beaten down, screamed to say no, to run from the obvious danger. But then he thought of the silence of his apartment, the fear that coiled in his stomach every time the phone rang, the hollow ache of betrayal that felt like it might never heal. He thought of Miles's sneer. He was tired of being afraid. Why? Leo whispered again, needing to understand. Why would you do this? For a stranger? Kai didn't look away. Because no one should have to whisper their loneliness to an empty line at 3 a.m. Because I have the power to fix a problem I heard. So I am fixing it. It wasn't about charity. It was about action. About seeing a broken thing and deciding to repair it simply because he could. In its own way, it was the most honest reason Leo had ever been given for anything. He took a deep, shaky breath. The scent of his own apartment, of yeast, sugar, and safety, filled his lungs one more time. He looked at the two alphas who had walked out of the night and into his life. It was a deal with wolves. But wolves at least were loyal to their pack. Okay, Leo said, the word small but decisive in the quiet room. I'll take the job. The headquarters of Kai's family business wasn't a dark, scary lair as Leo had half imagined. It was a sleek, modern tower of glass and steel that reflected the city skyline. The lobby was all cool marble and quiet efficiency, filled with people in sharp suits who moved with purpose. Leo, clutching his bag containing his favorite rolling pin and a notebook of recipes, felt like a tiny flour-smudged sparrow who had flown into a room full of hawks. A man in a discreet earpiece met him at the entrance and without a word, led him to a private elevator that whisked him directly to the sub-level cafeteria kitchens. The kitchen itself was a baker's dream. It was vast, spotlessly clean, and filled with professional-grade equipment that shone under bright lights. It was also utterly silent and empty. Leo's footsteps echoed. For a moment, the sheer scale of it overwhelmed him, the ghost of Miles's voice whispering in his ear, "You don't belong in a place like this." He shook his head, a new, fragile determination settling in his chest. He had taken this job. He would do it. He tied on the crisp, new apron that had been left for him and got to work. The silence didn't last long. Around mid-morning, just as the first scents of baking cinnamon and butter began to warm the sterile air, the kitchen door swung open. Leo jumped, nearly dropping a sheet of pastry. It was Jack's. He wasn't in the intimidating dark clothes from the early morning. He wore a tailored gray shirt, sleeves rolled up, and he was grinning. There he is. The savior of our taste buds, he announced, his voice bouncing cheerfully off the stainless steel. He leaned against a counter, watching as Leo carefully glazed a batch of danishes. "So, how's the Dragon's Lair treating you?" "Dragon's Lair?" Leo asked, glancing up cautiously. "Kai's office is on the top floor. He broods up there." "It's a whole thing," Jack said with a wink. "Smells amazing in here though. 1,000,000 times better than the sad egg salad that used to haunt this place." Leo felt a small, real smile touch his lips for the first time that day. Jax's energy was infectious, a bright, noisy contrast to the quiet anxiety in his own heart. "I'm just making some basics today. Getting a feel for the ovens." "Well, feel away," Jack said, snagging a still warm croissant. He took a bite and his eyes widened in genuine delight. "Whoa, okay. Leo, you're a wizard. This is incredible." He polished it off in 3 more bites. "You're officially my favorite person in this whole building. Don't tell Kai. His ego is big enough." Leo's smile grew a little. It felt good being appreciated for what he could do. "It's just butter and flour," he murmured, but he was pleased. Jack stayed for 15 minutes, filling the space with easy chatter about nothing in particular. A funny story about a stubborn supplier, his opinion on the terrible office coffee. He didn't ask prying questions. He just kept him company. When he left, the kitchen felt warmer, less intimidating. An hour later, as Leo was pulling perfect, golden loaves of sourdough from a steam-injected oven, the door opened again. This time it was Kai. He moved silently, a shadow in a perfectly cut black suit. He didn't speak immediately, just stood observing as Leo, humming softly to himself, transferred the loaves to a cooling rack with careful reverence. Kai's presence was different from Jax's, a calm, steady pressure in the room rather than a burst of sunlight. "It's going well?" Kai finally asked, his voice low. Leo nodded, wiping his hands on his apron. "Yes. The equipment is wonderful." He hesitated, then gestured to the loaves. "The sourdough is my favorite. Takes time and care. You have to listen to it." Kai's gaze lingered on the bread's crackling, flour-dusted crust. "Listening is important," he agreed, and his dark eyes lifted to meet Leo's. "It wasn't just about the bread. Has anyone bothered you?" The question was simple, but Leo heard the steel beneath it. He shook his head quickly. "No. No one. Everyone has been polite. Distant but polite." "Good." Kai took a step closer, not threatening, but close enough that Leo could see the flecks of gray in his otherwise dark eyes. "If anyone says a word that makes you uncomfortable, or if that man tries to contact you, you tell me. Or you tell Jax. Immediately. Do you understand?" It was an order, but it was wrapped in a fierceness that felt protective, not controlling. A safety net made of titanium. Leo found himself nodding again. "I understand." Kai gave a single, satisfied nod. His eyes swept the kitchen once more, taking in the orderly progress, the growing piles of perfect pastries. A look of something almost like approval flickered across his face. "The scent reaches my office," he said, a faint, almost invisible softening at the corner of his mouth. "It's better than coffee." Then, as silently as he arrived, he turned and left. Leo let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. The encounters were so different. Jax, who made him laugh and feel seen. Kai, who made him feel safe. Protected in a way he'd never experienced. It was confusing and overwhelming, and deep down, a small, tightly budded flower of hope began to unfurl in the barren soil of his heart. But old wounds run deep. Later, as he was cleaning a large mixer, the heavy bowl slipped from his soapy hands and clanged against the steel sink with a deafening, crashing echo. The sound was a trigger. Suddenly, Leo wasn't in the safe, bright kitchen. He was back in his old apartment, listening to Miles slam a door, shouting that Leo was a clumsy, useless idiot. The memory was a physical blow. He flinched violently, his whole body tensing, hands coming up almost defensively as he stumbled back from the sink, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. He squeezed his eyes shut, waiting for the yelling, for the scorn. "Leo?" The voice was calm. Close. It wasn't Miles's sneer. He opened his eyes. Jax was there, having returned, his playful demeanor gone, replaced by focused concern. He hadn't touched him, but he was standing between Leo and the door, his body a relaxed but alert barrier. "Hey, it's okay. It was just a bowl. It's fine." Leo trembled, shame heating his face. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to." "Leo," Jax said, his tone firm but gentle. "Breathe. Look." He pointed at the bowl, sitting undamaged in the sink. "No harm done. This is a kitchen. Things make noise." Slowly, the panic began to recede, leaving behind a shaky embarrassment. Jax didn't make fun of him. He didn't get angry. He just waited, his presence a steady anchor until Leo's breathing evened out. "He used to yell," Leo whispered, the confession torn from him. "About little things. Broken dishes. Spilled flour. I still hear it sometimes." Jax's expression darkened, but not at Leo. His anger was directed at a ghost, at a memory of a man he'd never met. "Well," he said, his voice returning to its usual lightness, though his eyes remained serious, "the only yelling in this building is Kai at people who mess up security protocols. And you," he nudged the bowl with a finger, "are in charge of pastries. You're basically untouchable. Come on, wizard. Show me how to properly shape one of those baguettes. I promise not to throw anything." And just like that, with a joke and a simple request, Jax pulled him back into the present, into the warm, safe kitchen. The old wound still ached, but for the first time, Leo felt like it wasn't a secret he had to bear alone. He had friends. Strange, powerful, and utterly unique friends, who saw his flinches and didn't look away, but instead quietly promised to stand in the way of whatever had caused them. A week passed in the strange, new rhythm of Leo's life. His days were filled with the familiar, comforting rituals of baking, but now they were performed in the gleaming kitchen that felt more like his own with each passing hour. The fear of Miles began to recede, like a tide pulled back by the twin moons of Kai and Jax's constant, if different, attentions. Kai visited every day. His check-ins were brief and quiet, a silent presence in the doorway, a single question about his well-being, a lingering look that seemed to catalog Leo's mood before he left with a soft carry on. Jax, meanwhile, had become a fixture, inventing reasons to pop in. He'd claim he was testing quality control on the lemon tarts, or needed a strategic sugar boost, and would slump in a corner stool, telling Leo outrageous, funny stories about the logistics business that always seemed to involve Jax outsmarting someone in a creatively chaotic way. Leo found himself laughing more. The hollow ache in his chest was being slowly filled with the warmth of freshly baked bread and the warmth of this unexpected companionship. He started to relax, his shoulders losing their perpetual hunch. One afternoon, as a gentle rain pattered against the high windows of the kitchen, he was decorating a batch of petit fours with tiny, delicate flowers of icing. Jax was there, doodling on a notepad, trying to design a more intimidating cupcake for a security team meeting. "You know," Leo said softly, not looking up from his precise work, "I haven't heard from him." "Miles." "Not a call or a text. It's peaceful." Jax's doodling stopped. He didn't make a joke. "Good," he said, his voice uncharacteristically flat. Kai chose that moment to enter, as if summoned by the subject. He had a file folder in his hand, but his eyes went straight to Leo. He saw the thoughtful, slightly sad expression on his face. He saw Jax's unusual stillness. He set the folder down on the stainless steel counter with a soft tap. "It's time," Kai said, not as a boss but as someone stating a simple fact. "You feel safe here now. But a shadow you don't look at can still trip you. Tell us." "All of it." Leo's icing hand stilled. The peaceful feeling wavered. He looked from Kai's solemn, expectant face to Jax's encouraging nod. They weren't pushing. They were offering. An opening to lay down a burden he'd been carrying alone for too long. He took a deep breath, the sweet scent of sugar in the air suddenly feeling at odds with the bitterness of the memory. "It wasn't always bad," Leo began, his voice barely above a whisper, as if saying it too loud might make it real again. "When we first met, he was so charming. He said all the right things. He made me feel special, like I was the only person in the world who mattered." He put the icing bag down, his fingers trembling slightly. "I was alone. My parents, they were gone. I had the bakery job in this little apartment and a small bit of money they left me. It wasn't a fortune, but it was safe. It was mine." Jax had straightened up, his playful mask completely gone. Kai leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, his gaze a focused, intense beam on Leo. "Miles," Leo continued, the name tasting sour. He started with little things. He'd say, "Let me help you manage that, it must be stressful." Then it was, "Your car is so old, let me use the money to get you something safer." He made it sound like love. Like he was taking care of me. A single hot tear escaped and traced a path through the fine dust of powdered sugar on his cheek. "I was so grateful to not be alone that I just let him. I handed over everything. The bank accounts, the bills. I trusted him." The kitchen was silent except for the hum of the refrigerators and the sound of Leo's shaky breath. This was the heart of it. The betrayal. "Then the money was gone," Leo said, the words hollow. "All of it. Spent on things for him. Clothes, dinners with people I never met, a fancy watch. And when there was nothing left, the mask came off." He wrapped his arms around himself. "He told me I was naive, stupid, that I was a weak, pathetic omega who needed someone stronger to run my life, and I'd failed at even that. He said no one else would ever want me. That the only reason he'd stayed was for the money, and now that it was gone, I was useless." A low, dangerous growl rumbled in Jax's throat. Kai's knuckles where he gripped the counter edge were white. Their anger was a live wire in the room, but it wasn't directed at him. It was a shield forming around his words. "He stayed for 2 more weeks, Leo whispered, the memory crushing him. "Just to make it hurt more. He'd eat the food I made, wear the clothes I washed, and tell me every day how worthless I was. That I was lucky he was still there out of pity. The day he finally left, he took the last thing of value I had, a ring that belonged to my mother. He said it was payment for his time." He finally looked up, his eyes swimming with tears, meeting Kai's stormy gaze. "And I believed him. For months I believed him. That it was my fault. That I was weak and useless and unlovable." The last word broke in the air. For a moment, there was only the sound of the rain. Then Kai moved. He didn't go to Leo. He pushed off from the counter, turning to stare out the window at the gray city, his back rigid with a controlled, terrifying fury. Jax stood up, his chair scraping loudly. He paced 2 steps, running a hand through his hair, his jaw clenched so tight a muscle ticked. Jack spat the word, is a parasite. A spineless, cowardly leech. Kai turned back from the window. The look on his face was not one Leo had ever seen before. It was icy, wrathful, and utterly final. He saw a gentle heart and tried to break it for spare change. His voice was deathly quiet, each word a chip of falling ice. He didn't just take your money, Leo. He tried to steal your light. That is an unforgivable crime. The word crime hung in the air, weighted with new meaning. This wasn't just a broken heart to them. It was an offense. An injustice in their code. Leo wiped his cheeks, the raw confession leaving him feeling scoured clean but strangely lighter. The shame he'd carried was out in the open, and these two powerful men weren't recoiling from it. They were angry for him. Jack stopped pacing and came to stand closer, his usual energy replaced by a solid, protective warmth. Listen to me. You are not useless. You built a home that smells like heaven. You took care of a snake because you have a heart that knows how to care. That's not weakness. That's strength he could never understand. Kai walked over, stopping on Leo's other side. He didn't touch him, but his presence was a fortress wall. His words were lies, Kai stated, his dark eyes burning with conviction. Tools to keep you small. You are here now. You are under our protection. And his debt, Kai's voice dropped to a whisper that promised storms, is far from paid. The last of Leo's tears dried. The old, festering wound was finally exposed to the light. The fierce, protective light of two alphas who had decided, for reasons he still didn't fully understand, that he was worth defending. The healing was painful, like cleaning a deep cut. But for the first time he truly believed it might actually heal. The confession changed things. Leo felt it in the air around him. Kai and Jax's protectiveness, which had been a quiet promise, now became a visible, tangible force. When Jax visited the kitchen, his eyes would scan the room as if checking for threats before he relaxed into his usual joking. Kai's brief check-ins now included a specific, searching look at Leo's face, as if reading for any new shadows. They were treating him like precious, fragile cargo, and while part of Leo loved the safety of it, another, newer part of him quietly bristled. He wasn't a broken vase. He was a person who was learning to glue his own pieces back together. The bakery had given him that. The steady rhythm of kneading dough, the alchemy of the oven, the smiles on the faces of the serious office workers when they bit into a chocolate brioche, it was rebuilding him from the inside out. He was starting to feel strong, not because of the alphas who guarded him, but because of the work he did with his own two hands. Then the call came. Leo was cleaning up at the end of the day, his phone buzzing on the counter. The screen flashed with a name he had deleted but had memorized by heart. Miles. His blood ran cold. For a long moment he just stared at it, his newfound strength wavering like a mirage. The instinct to let it ring out warred with a sick, curious dread. On the seventh ring, his finger, moving almost on its own, swiped to answer. He said nothing. Leo? Miles's voice came through, smooth and familiar, laced with a false warmth that made Leo's stomach twist. Leo, thank goodness you answered. What do you want, Miles? Leo's voice was flat, much stronger than he felt. A heavy, practiced sigh. Look, I've had a lot of time to think. What I did, what I said, was awful. I was under so much pressure and I took it out on you. The person who least deserved it. He sounded convincingly regretful. The old Leo would have softened immediately. The new Leo felt a chill. Okay, Leo said non-committal. I'm leaving the city, Miles continued, the words rushing out. A fresh start. But before I go, there's something I need to give back. That little book of your mom's recipes. The one with the blue cloth cover. I found it packed in my stuff. I must have taken it by mistake when I left. Leo's breath hitched. The recipe book. It was the only thing he'd truly mourned more than the money. His mother's handwriting, her notes in the margins, the smudges of vanilla and cocoa. It was priceless. Miles knew it. I just want to give it back to you, Leo. No strings. Let me just do this one decent thing. Can I meet you? Tonight? Just for 5 minutes. It was a trap. Every cell in Leo's body screamed it. The sweet tone, the convenient remorse, the perfect bait. But the thought of that book, of holding that piece of his mother and his old happy self again, it was a powerful lure. A stupid, dangerous, powerful lure. He thought of Kai's icy rage, of Jax's protective warmth. They would tell him no. They would probably lock him in the kitchen to keep him safe. The thought sparked a small, defiant flame in his chest. He wasn't a prisoner. He could be smart. He could be careful. Where? Leo asked, his voice tight. Miles named a small, public park a few blocks from Leo's old apartment. 8 o'clock? I'll be on the bench by the old fountain. Fine, Leo said and hung up before Miles could say another word. His heart was pounding. He knew it was foolish. But the recipe book, and maybe, a tiny hidden part of him whispered, maybe he needed to prove to himself that he could face the ghost of Miles and not shatter. He didn't tell Kai or Jax. At 10 to 8, Leo stood at the edge of the park. The streetlights cast long, lonely shadows. The bench by the broken fountain was empty. The park was too quiet. His courage, which had felt so solid in the bright kitchen, began to crack and leak away. This was a mistake. A huge mistake. He was about to turn and run when a figure stepped out from behind a large tree. Miles. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. In his hand was a small, familiar blue book. Leo, Miles said, walking toward him. You came. I'm so glad. He held the book out. Leo took a hesitant step forward, his eyes fixed on the book. He was just within arm's reach when Miles's smile vanished. His free hand shot out not for the book but for Leo's wrist, his grip like iron. Did you really think it would be that easy? Miles hissed, all pretense gone. His eyes were cold and hungry. I saw you with those guys in the suits. You landed on your feet, didn't you? Pretty new friends must mean pretty new money. You owe me, Leo. For all the time I wasted on you. Leo tried to pull back, panic seizing his throat. Let go of me. I don't have anything. You're coming with me, Miles snarled, yanking him closer. We're going to have a little chat about your rich new. His words were cut off by a sound, not a shout but the soft, precise click of a shoe on the pavement. Miles looked up, his grip loosening in shock. From the deep shadow of a pathway, two figures emerged. Kai, in a black coat that seemed to drink the light, his expression utterly calm, utterly terrifying. Jax, a step to the side, his hands casually in his pockets, a smile on his face that held no humor whatsoever. I believe, Kai said, his voice cutting through the silent park like a blade. The Omega said to let him go. Miles froze, his bravado evaporating. He looked from Kai's deadly stillness to Jax's predatory smile. He was a bully who had stumbled into a wolf's den. He released Leo's wrist as if it had burned him. Leo stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, his eyes wide. How? Jax didn't take his eyes off Miles. You got a security detail, Leo. A really good one. We're kind of insulted you thought you could sneak out. Kai took another step forward. He didn't even look at Miles. His gaze was fixed on Leo, checking for injury. You are unhurt? He asked, his voice softer. Leo nodded, speechless. Only then did Kai turn his attention to Miles. The air grew colder. You have 3 seconds to be gone from this city, Kai stated, each word measured and heavy. If you ever come near him again, if you even think his name, you will disappear. Not a threat. A promise. Miles, pale and trembling, didn't need to be told twice. He dropped the blue recipe book on the ground and fled into the darkness, his footsteps echoing with panic. The moment he was gone, Leo's knees buckled. Not from fear but from the sheer, overwhelming relief. Jax was there in an instant, a steadying hand on his shoulder. Kai bent and picked up the recipe book, brushing off a speck of dirt with a surprising tenderness before handing it to Leo. I'm sorry, Leo whispered, clutching the book to his chest, fresh tears of shame and relief spilling over. I'm so stupid. I just wanted... You wanted something that was taken from you? Kai interrupted, his voice losing its icy edge. That is not stupid. It is human. But trusting a snake to return it was optimistic. Jax squeezed his shoulder. Next time you want to walk into an obvious trap, just tell us. We'll come with you and make it more fun. Leo looked at them, Kai, who had appeared out of the night like an avenging angel, and Jax, whose jokes were just another form of armor. They had followed him. They had protected him. Not because he was weak but because he was theirs to protect. The last of his defiance melted away, replaced by a deep, sure knowledge. He didn't just have powerful friends. He had a pack. And for the first time he truly believed he belonged in it. The ride back from the park was a silent one, but it was a different kind of silence than the one that had filled Leo's apartment the morning they'd first met. It wasn't empty or lonely. It was a quiet filled with unspoken understanding, thick and warm like the steam from a just-baked loaf. Leo sat in the back of the sleek car, the precious blue recipe book held tightly in his lap. His hands had stopped shaking, but a deep, emotional tremor still hummed inside him. He watched the city lights blur past the tinted window, a kaleidoscope of color against the dark. Kai drove, his eyes on the road, his posture as controlled as ever. But his grip on the steering wheel was just a fraction tighter than usual. Jax sat in the passenger seat, no longer joking, occasionally glancing back at Leo in the rearview mirror with a look of solid, reassuring certainty. They didn't bombard him with questions or scold him. They simply took him back to the one place they knew was truly safe, the headquarters. Instead of taking him to the kitchen or his new small apartment in the secure residential wing of the building, Kai led them to his own private suite on the top floor. It wasn't the opulent, cold space Leo had imagined. It was spacious and elegantly simple, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the sleeping city, and furnishings in deep, comfortable grays and blues. It felt like a fortress, but a lived-in one. "Sit," Kai said, his voice a low rumble as he gestured to a large plush sofa. Leo obeyed, sinking into the cushions that seemed to embrace him. Jax disappeared into a small kitchenette and returned a minute later with 3 mugs of steaming chamomile tea. The gentle herbal sent a soothing balm in the air. He handed one to Leo, their fingers brushing briefly, a small warm point of contact. "Drink," Jax said, not as an order but as a suggestion from a friend. "It'll help the adrenaline crash." Leo took the mug, letting the heat seep into his palms. He took a careful sip. The warmth traveled all the way down to his stomach, unknotting some of the tight coils of fear that remained. This was the healing. Not a dramatic fix but the simple, steady application of care. Kai didn't sit. He stood by the windows, a dark silhouette against the glittering city, giving Leo space but remaining a watchful presence. After a few minutes of quiet sipping, he spoke without turning around. "The book? Is it really his?" Leo looked down at the worn blue cloth cover in his lap. He opened it, his mother's looping handwriting greeting him like a hug from the past. "No," he said, his voice firmer now. "She gave it to me for my 16th birthday. He stole it. Just like he stole everything else." He traced a smudge of chocolate next to a recipe for Black Forest cake. "But now it's back." "Good," Kai said, a single, satisfied word. Jack settled on the sofa, not too close but close enough. "You know," he began, his tone lightening back to its usual cadence, "for a guy who bakes the world's most delicate meringues, you've got a surprisingly solid right hook. Saw you trying to wrench your wrist free. Not bad form." It was such an absurd, Jax-like thing to say, finding a compliment in a moment of terror. A weak, surprised laugh bubbled out of Leo. "It didn't work." "Hey, the intention was there," Jax grinned. "We'll work on the follow-through." The laugh, the gentle teasing, it was like opening a window in a stuffy room. The last of the panic began to dissipate. Leo took another sip of tea, feeling the warmth spread further. Kai finally turned from the window. He came over and sat in a chair opposite the sofa, leaning forward, his elbows on his knees. "What you feel now," he said, his dark eyes holding Leo's, "is not shame. It is the aftershock of facing a predator. You walked into the trap, yes. But you also walked out. On your own 2 feet. That is what matters." The words rearranged something inside Leo. He had been bracing for disappointment, for the "I told you so" he felt he deserved. Instead, Kai was reframing it as a survival. A lesson learned, not a failure. Later, when the tea was gone and a comfortable quiet had settled, Jax produced a tablet. "Right. Critical question. What is the greatest animated film of all time and why is it How to Train Your Dragon?" Leo blinked. "What?" "I don't know. I like the bakery montage in Ratatouille." Jax gasped in mock horror, launching into a passionate, silly defense of Vikings and dragons. Kai just shook his head, a faint, almost invisible smile touching his lips as he listened to the debate. They weren't treating him like glass. They were just being with him. As the night deepened, Leo found himself tucked under a soft blanket on the large sofa, the city lights twinkling like a distant constellation. A movie Jax had chosen, something funny and full of adventure, played on the large screen, but Leo was barely watching. He was absorbing the feeling of the room. The safety of it. The way Kai would occasionally get up to adjust the thermostat or bring a glass of water, each small action a silent "I am here." The way Jax would whisper ridiculous commentary about the film, making Leo smile into the blanket. This was it. This was the medicine he'd needed but never known how to ask for. Not grand gestures, but the steadfast, patient presence of people who saw his scars and didn't flinch, who saw his momentary foolishness and didn't condemn. They were building a new memory over the old, terrible one. A memory of warmth and tea and quiet protection after a storm. He fell asleep there on the sofa, the recipe book safe beside him, lulled by the low hum of the film and the profound, unshakable knowledge that he was finally and completely not alone. The healing wasn't a single moment, it was this. It was the promise, written in quiet actions and shared silence, that he had a place to come home to. Leo awoke on Kai's sofa to the soft, gray light of morning filtering through the massive windows. For a moment he was disoriented, the plush blanket and the smell of clean linen foreign. Then the memories of the previous night settled over him. The trap, the rescue, the tea, the quiet safety. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The recipe book was still on the coffee table, and a note in sharp, precise handwriting lay beside it. Kitchen is yours. We have meetings until noon. No questions. No fuss. Just simple permission to return to his sanctuary. Leo felt a surge of gratitude, but it was quickly followed by a new, restless feeling. He folded the blanket neatly, his movements thoughtful. Last night had proven something. Kai and Jax were his protectors, his fortress. But he didn't want to just be someone who needed protecting, hidden away behind high walls. Miles had called him weak. For too long Leo had believed him. It was time to rewrite that story. He spent the morning in the kitchen, the familiar work grounding him. But his mind was working as busily as his hands. When he heard the distinct sound of Jax's laughter echoing down the hall just after lunch, followed by Kai's lower murmur, he knew they were coming. He took a deep breath, wiping his hands on his apron. When they entered, Jax immediately made a beeline for a tray of freshly glazed cinnamon rolls. Kai's eyes went to Leo, a silent check-in. "I have a request," Leo said before he could lose his nerve. His voice was clear, stronger than it had been a week ago. Both alphas paused. Jax, with a bun halfway to his mouth, and Kai tilting his head slightly. "Anything," Kai said, the word an open promise. "I want you to teach me," Leo stated. Jax blinked. "Teach you what?" "The secret family recipe for our 5-cheese ravioli? Because I think Nana would actually have me disappeared." "No," Leo said, a small smile touching his lips but his gaze serious. "I want you to teach me how to be strong. Not just emotionally, physically. I don't want to freeze the next time someone grabs me. I don't want my only defense to be hoping you're nearby." He looked directly at Kai. "You said I walked out of the trap on my own 2 feet. I want to make sure I can always walk out." The kitchen was silent. Kai studied him, his dark eyes searching for any hint of fear or doubt. He found none. He saw only a quiet, determined flame. It was a request he had not expected, and it pleased him in a deep, fundamental way. "It will not be easy," Kai warned, his tone not to dissuade but to prepare. "It will be uncomfortable. You will be sore." "I'm used to hard work," Leo replied, lifting his flour-dusted hands. "It's just a different kind of dough." A genuine, broad grin spread across Jax's face. He put the cinnamon roll down. "Oh, I am so in. We can start with the basics. How to get out of holds, how to use your size as an advantage, where to hit if you absolutely have to." His enthusiasm was infectious. Kai gave a single, firm nod. "All right. But we do this my way. Slow. Precise. The goal is not to make you a fighter. The goal is to make you confident. To make your body listen to your mind instead of your fear." He stepped closer. "Your strength, Leo, is not in being an alpha. Your strength is your kindness, your resilience. This training will just be the shell to protect that heart. Do you understand?" Leo's throat felt tight. He understood perfectly. They weren't trying to change who he was. They were arming who he was meant to be. "I understand." The lessons began that evening in a private, mirrored gym deep within the building. Jax took the lead first, his teaching style as lively as his personality. He showed Leo how to stand, how to balance his weight, how to turn a grab into a leverage point to break free. "See, you're smaller so you're quicker." Jax encouraged as Leo practiced slipping out of a wrist hold. "Use that. Be a slippery little eel." Leo, red-faced and puffing, couldn't help but laugh. "An eel?" "A very dignified, bakery-scented eel," Jax amended with a wink. Kai's lessons were different. He focused on breath and awareness. "Fear makes your vision narrow," he said, standing behind Leo as they faced the mirror. "You see only the threat. You must learn to see the space, the exits, the objects around you. Your environment is a tool." He taught Leo how to project his voice from his diaphragm, how to shout a firm, "Back off." That didn't sound like a plea but a command. One afternoon, as Leo was practicing a simple deflection move with Jax, he stumbled, his foot slipping on the mat. Instinctively he flinched, his hands coming up, bracing for a reprimand or a laugh. Jax instantly dropped his stance, his hands going up in a peaceful gesture. "Whoa, easy. It's just me. No penalty for slipping in here, chef. That's how you learn." Leo slowly lowered his hands, his heart pounding from the old memory, not the stumble. He met Jax's understanding gaze. "Old habits," he mumbled. "We're making new ones," Jax said simply. Again. And this time when you pivot, really commit. I promise I won't let you fall. Slowly, session by session, the flinches became fewer. The shaky breath became steadier. Leo's muscles ached in new ways, but it was a good ache, an ache of growth. He learned to fall safely. He learned where to strike to create an opening to run. He learned that his omega nature, his empathy, his ability to read a room, was an asset. He could sense Jax's playful feints and Kai's more serious tells. He wasn't becoming an alpha. He was becoming Leo, an omega who knew how to knead bread into submission and how to twist a wrist hold into a release. An omega who could create sweetness and defend it. One day, after a particularly good session where he'd successfully used Jax's own momentum to unbalance him, Leo stood panting, a triumphant smile on his face. Kai, who had been observing quietly from the side, approached. He didn't offer praise with words. Instead, he reached out and gently adjusted Leo's stance, turning his shoulder a fraction of an inch. His touch was firm and sure. Better, Kai said, his voice a low hum of approval. The strength was always there. You were just learning how to turn the key. Leo looked at his reflection in the mirror, a little sweaty, his hair messy but standing taller, his eyes brighter, no longer looking down or away. He saw not a victim but a survivor. Not a weakling but a work in progress who was actively forging his own armor. He was building his own fortress, brick by brick, right alongside the one Kai and Jax had built for him. And for the first time he felt truly, unshakably strong. Weeks melted into a new, peaceful rhythm. Leo's days were a balance of flower-dusted creation in the kitchen and focused, empowering sessions in the gym. The ghost of Miles had been banished, or so it seemed. He felt stronger, happier, and more settled than he had in his entire life. The bond with Kai and Jax had deepened into something unbreakable, a quiet understanding that needed few words. But a snake, when threatened, doesn't always slither away. Sometimes it tries to strike from the shadows. It started with small, annoying problems at Kai's logistics offices. A key shipment of perfectly legal high-end electronics was delayed by mysterious paperwork errors at the port. 2 loyal, long-term clients suddenly received anonymous tips suggesting Kai's company was financially unstable. A sprinkler system on a secured warehouse floor mysteriously activated in the middle of the night, ruining a stockpile of important documents. To anyone else, it would look like a string of bad luck or clumsy incompetence. To Kai and Jax, it smelled like a deliberate, petty campaign. The moves were too targeted, too personal, and not nearly clever enough to be from a real rival. "It's amateur hour," Jax grumbled in Kai's office one evening, tossing a waterlogged file folder onto the desk. Annoying but not dangerous. Like a gnat. Kai leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. His expression was coldly analytical. A gnat with a specific grudge. He is trying to prove he can reach us. To prove he is not afraid. A faint, icy smile touched his lips. He has made a critical error. He has shown us his hand. Leo, bringing in a tray of after-dinner coffee and miniature fruit tarts he'd developed, paused in the doorway. "Is everything okay?" He'd heard the tension in their voices. Kai's expression softened the moment he saw him. "A minor pest problem," he said, accepting a cup. "Nothing for you to concern yourself with." But Leo was learning. He saw the water-stained folder, the tight set of Jax's shoulders. He put the tray down. "It's him, isn't it? Miles." Jax sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Looks like it. He's trying to be a nuisance from a distance. Pathetic, really." A strange calm settled over Leo. The old fear didn't rise. Instead, he felt a spark of the same protective anger he saw in them. This man was trying to hurt the people who had given him a home. "What will you do?" Kai took a slow sip of coffee, his eyes on Leo. "What we do best. We solve problems. But this time," he said, his voice dropping to a thoughtful murmur, "we will solve it his way. With trickery and lies. We will give him exactly what he's looking for." A plan cool and precise began to take shape. It wasn't about fists or threats. It was about intelligence and patience. This was revenge, served not hot and bloody but cold and deliberate. The next day, through channels too subtle to trace, a rumor began to circulate in the city's shadier corners. The word was that Kai's organization was indeed in a precarious spot due to the recent misfortunes. It was said he was desperate for a quick, discreet cash infusion and was willing to broker a one-time deal on a high-stakes shipment of luxury watches, a deal outside his usual, strictly legal channels. The bait was cast. Miles, lurking on the edges of the world he thought Kai inhabited, took it greedily. He saw his chance not just to annoy but to profit and humiliate. Using a fake identity, he scrambled to gather funds. money he likely borrowed from new, unsuspecting victims or shady lenders. He reached out to the designated fake contact, eager to be the one to take down the mighty Kai. The night of the supposed exchange arrived. It was to take place in a deserted riverside warehouse district. Miles arrived early, his heart pounding with a toxic mix of fear and triumph. He waited in the shadows, a briefcase of cash in his sweaty hand. At the exact appointed time, headlights cut through the fog. Not the sleek black cars of Kai's fleet, but the stark, unmistakable blue and red flashes of police cruisers. They surrounded the area silently, their approach masked by the very secrecy Miles had demanded. Confusion, then dawning horror, spread across Miles's face. He tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. He was caught, red-handed, with a large sum of unexplained cash, attempting to engage in what he believed was a major illicit transaction. As an officer read him his rights, another car, black and silent, pulled up at a distance. Inside, Kai, Jax, and Leo watched from the warmth of the interior. Leo's eyes were wide. "But how?" Leo whispered. "The contact he spoke to was one of ours," Jax explained, a note of grim satisfaction in his voice. "Every call was recorded. Every message saved. We fed him a story he wanted to believe and let him hang himself with it." Kai's gaze was fixed on the scene, his face impassive. "We provided anonymous, detailed tips to the Financial Crimes Unit. Evidence of his past fraud against you, his new debts, his attempt to broker an illegal deal. They were already interested. We just handed him to them. Wrapped in a bow. It was brilliant. And utterly merciless. There would be no dramatic confrontation, no satisfying punch. There would be court dates, lawyers, and the cold, hard reality of the legal system Miles thought he was too clever for. His attempt to play in the big leagues had exposed every one of his own crimes." Leo watched as Miles was put into the back of a police car, his head bowed, his grand revenge plot evaporated into the cold night air. He expected to feel a surge of triumph, but what he felt was quieter. It was closure. It was the final, definitive proof that the world Miles had built, a world of lies and manipulation, was a house of cards. And Kai and Jax had simply blown it down with a whisper. "He's gone," Leo said, more to himself than anyone. "Yes," Kai affirmed, finally turning his gaze from the window to Leo. His eyes were no longer icy but held a deep, settled certainty. "He will not touch your life again. His debt is paid to the only authority that matters now, the law he thought he could ignore." Jax started the car, pulling away from the scene. "And the best part?" he said, a real warm smile returning to his face. "We get to go home and eat those amazing tarts you made. Justice is sweet, but your baking is sweeter." As they drove back toward the tower of light that was their home, Leo felt the last fragile chain around his heart snap and fall away. The revenge wasn't for him. It was a cleanup. A removal of a toxic stain. And it left him completely, wonderfully free. The city, viewed from the rooftop garden of the tower, was a sea of glittering lights, a galaxy laid out at their feet. The air was cool and clean, carrying the distant, peaceful hum of the world below. Up here above everything it was quiet. For Leo, standing between Kai and Jax, the silence was no longer something to be filled. It was something to be shared. It was full. Miles was a closed chapter, his fate a distant, legal matter that held no more power over Leo's dreams. The kitchen downstairs was his kingdom, a place of creation and confidence. His body, once a source of fear, now felt capable and strong, remembering the lessons Jax had drilled into him and the calm focus Kai had taught him. He was healed. He was whole. But he was also something more. He was deeply, irrevocably loved. He felt it in the way Jax would leave a ridiculous, doodle-covered note on his recipe book. He felt it in the way Kai would wordlessly place a cup of his favorite tea beside him during a quiet moment. He felt it in the way they moved around him, not like guardians around a charge, but like planets in a steady, harmonious orbit, with him as their sun. Kai broke the comfortable silence, his voice a low vibration in the night air. "When you called that morning," he began, not looking at Leo but at the horizon, "it was a mistake. But it was the first true thing I had heard in a long time. In my world, everyone speaks in codes and lies. You spoke your heart to the empty air. It was a light in a very dark room." Leo's breath caught. Kai so rarely spoke like this. Jax bumped Leo's shoulder gently with his own. "He's trying to be poetic. What he means is you were a disaster and we're suckers for a fixer-upper." But his smile was tender, his usual joke a cover for the raw truth beneath. "You walked into our lives smelling of cinnamon and sadness and you changed the air. made this place feel less like a fortress and more like a home. Leo looked down at his hands, the hands that could shape delicate pastries and break a wrist hold. "You saved me," he whispered. "No," Kai said, turning to him now, his dark eyes serious in the starlight. "We gave you shelter. You saved yourself. You chose to stay. You chose to fight. You chose to heal. You built a new life right in front of us. That is your strength, Leo. Not ours." Jax nodded, his playful facade completely gone, leaving only earnest honesty. "We just provided the oven. You were the one who did the baking." The metaphor, coming from Jax, made Leo laugh, a soft, happy sound that mingled with the night breeze. The sound seemed to give Kai the final courage he needed. "This life we have," Kai said, gesturing between himself and Jax, "it is a partnership. A balance. We have watched you find your place in it, between us, beside us. You have become essential." He took a slow, deep breath. "The question is, do you want to stay in that place? Officially? Not as our baker or our protected charge, but as ours. As our heart." Jax reached out, his hand finding Leo's. His touch was warm and sure. "What the big guy is trying to say in his overly formal way is that we love you, Leo. Both of us. In our own messed up, protective, totally devoted ways. And we want to know if you could ever love us back. If you could be okay with having both of us." The world seemed to shrink to this rooftop, to the pressure of Jax's hand in his, to the intensity of Kai's gaze waiting for his answer. They were offering him everything. Not a cage of protection but a circle of belonging. A different kind of family. One built not on blood but on choice. On early morning phone calls and 4 a.m. rescues, on self-defense lessons and shared silences, on the victory of a perfect croissant and the defeat of a bitter past. He thought of the lonely boy he had been, whispering to a wrong number. That boy felt a lifetime away. He wasn't that person anymore. He was Leo, the baker, the survivor, the one who was loved by two alphas who saw his true worth. Tears welled in his eyes, but they were tears of pure, unshadowed joy. He looked at Jax with his open heart and easy laughter. He looked at Kai with his fierce loyalty and quiet depth. He didn't have to choose. He could have the sun and the moon. He could have the joke and the promise. A wide, radiant smile broke across his face, brighter than all the city lights below. He squeezed Jax's hand and turned to fully face Kai. "Yes," he said, the word clear and sure, a vow on the wind. "1,000 times yes. I love you too. Both of you. You are my home." For the first time since Leo had known him, Kai's calm, controlled expression melted completely. A real, breathtaking smile transformed his face, filled with a relief and a happiness so profound it made Leo's heart ache. He stepped forward, cupping Leo's face in his hands, his thumbs gently brushing away the happy tears. He didn't kiss him, not yet, just held his gaze, sealing the promise with a look. Jax whooped, a sound of pure triumph that echoed off the rooftop, and wrapped his arms around both of them, pulling them into a tight, three-way embrace. Leo was caught between them, surrounded by their strength, their warmth, their love. He was safe. He was chosen. He was theirs. Below them the city moved on, unaware. But high above, a new family was formed under the stars, bound not by tradition, but by a wrong number, a 4 a.m. visit, and the courageous, healing power of a love that had been brave enough to arrive in twos.